Hi, it's Summer and this is my July wrap up. I am really happy with my reading in July. I read a lot of books. I also read quite a few really good books, so I'm excited to tell you about all of them. Okay, so the first book that I read in July was Practice Makes Perfect by Sarah Adams. This is the sequel to When in Rome by the same author. I gave this one 4 stars. This one follows the sister of the male love interest from the first book. Her name is Annie and she owns a floral shop. And then I think the male love interest is the bodyguard of the female love interest from the first book. For this one, I said, OMG, too cute. This was definitely cheesy and I wish that it wasn't Fade to Black / Closed Door, but I really, really liked this one. I'm so glad that this book had characters that communicated and I just loved their chemistry. I would love to be friends with Annie and I love how perfect Will was for her. I also found myself laughing out loud multiple times while reading, and just like When in Rome, I loved all of the Audrey references. When in Rome and this book are both kind of based off of Audrey Hepburn films, or at least have like heavy Audrey Hepburn references and stuff in them. I'm a really big Audrey Hepburn fan, so it's been really fun because I just understand all of the references and stuff. I don't think you need to be an Audrey fan to enjoy these books at all, but it's just extra fun if you already love her. The first book in the series, When in Rome, is kind of based off of Roman Holiday that Audrey was in with Gregory Peck. That one's my favorite Audrey Hepburn movie. And this one I think is based off of like Funny Face, which is also one of my favorites. Very cute. So along with recommending this book and this series, I would also recommend those Audrey movies. So yeah, really cute, easy read, 4 stars, and I'm definitely going to be continuing in the series. After that, I read my most anticipated book of the year, and that was The Only One Left by Riley Sager. I feel like pretty much everybody picked this book up in July. For the synopsis of this one, I'm just going to read the inside flap because it's too good. At 17, Lenora Hope hung her sister with a rope, stabbed her father with a knife, took her mother's happy life. It wasn't me, Lenora said, but she's the only one not dead. And it follows her and her caregiver and her telling the story of what really happened to her caregiver. I gave this one 3.5 out of 5 stars. I've kind of been shuffling in between 3.5 and a 4 star, but I think 3.5 feels about right. For this one, I said so twisty, which it definitely was. This book was sadder than I thought it would be, but the atmosphere and the setting were so good and the plot will keep you guessing all the way until the end. And while this one wasn't my favorite Riley Sager book, it's definitely one of like the higher up ones for me. I would consider this like a favorite of his, just not like my number one or anything, you know? Like I said though, the atmosphere of this was definitely my favorite part of the book, like the setting and stuff. It takes place in this really old house that's like basically falling off of a cliff. It's like leaning really far to the side. It just feels eerie and like it's falling apart. It hasn't really been updated, so it just feels creepy. It did feel a little bit slower paced for most of it, but it wasn't slow enough for me to be like, I'm so bored. But I do feel like it moves slower than at least some of his other books. Not in a bad way though. At the end of this one though, you kind of just can't catch your breath. There is so much that happens. I feel like even if you get spoiled for some of the things that'll happen, you'll still be surprised by so many things. Like there are so many twists that happen. So that's kind of fun. I would definitely say to keep a character list if you're not good at remembering names and who people are, because that's something that I struggle with, and I think I would have gotten more out of the book if I was paying closer attention to those things. The next book that I read was Astrid Parker Doesn't Fail. It's the sequel to Delilah Green Doesn't Care. I love the covers of the books in this series, and I really especially love this one. I gave this one 4.5 out of 5 stars, but honestly, I could be tempted to give it 5. I really, really loved this one. For this one, I said the dedication alone made me love this book. The dedication is for everyone who figured it out a little later in life. And as someone who figured out their bisexuality later in life as like a 26, 27-year-old, I definitely relate to the dedication, and it just made me instantly fall in love with the book. I found it so relatable on many levels. I loved the romance, character development, the found family, the interior design / HGTV vibes, and all of the awesome representation. It was deep, but also fun and steamy. A couple of things were a little bit heavy-handed and in your face, but overall I really loved this and I'm excited to continue in the series. Looking back, I don't really remember what I was talking about when I said that things were a little bit heavy-handed, so I don't really have anything to elaborate on that. And I should probably tell you what this one is about. This one follows the main character Astrid, who is an interior designer. She's a little bit uptight and a little bit of a perfectionist. She ends up getting this really cool job to renovate a local, I think it's like an inn or like a bed and breakfast. It's an older home and she's going to be fixing it up. And the renovation is all going to be taking place on TV, kind of for like an HGTV type of network. The lead carpenter on the renovation is Jordan, and her and Astrid definitely kind of butt heads. They have a little bit of like an enemies to lovers thing going on. And just like the dedication kind of like hints at, this book is about Astrid kind of coming into her sexuality and realizing that she's bisexual. I really loved the bi rep in this just because I related to it in a lot of ways, but I just really loved this. I had a fun time reading it. I loved the vibes, and I'm really looking forward to the next book. All right, now we're getting into the books that I read for Summerween. The first book that I read for that was Ascension by Nicholas Binge. This one is a sci-fi thriller horror book. It's about a group of scientists that go out into the middle of the ocean to investigate this mountain that has just grown out of the ocean, out of nowhere basically. Not only are they battling the elements and like the really cold temperatures on this mountain, but there's also something hunting them. I gave this one 3 stars. I said I liked this, but I'm disappointed that I didn't love it as much as I was expecting to. It started off really strong and I loved the premise, but I think that it was trying to do too many things. It had a lot of litfic and religious / existential stuff going on that I wasn't expecting, and it just didn't work for me in this one. I think if it had more horror or thriller vibes, I would have enjoyed it more. It was a very interesting and thought-provoking read though. Like I said in my review, I feel like my main things that would have made me love the book more was if it was simplified and was trying to do less things, and if it was more horror, because it just wasn't as scary as I was wanting it to be. Also, the format of this book was kind of cool. It was kind of in like epistolary form. You're kind of hearing the story through some letters that one of the scientists wrote to his niece while he was on this expedition. After that, I read What Moves the Dead by T. Kingfisher. I gave this one 4 stars. I said I really enjoyed this one. Very eerie and gothic with great descriptions and perfect atmosphere. I think this story worked really well as a shorter book, and I really loved T. Kingfisher's writing style, as always. It was a little slow at the beginning and I had to push through a little bit, but it was definitely worth it. If you're a horror fan, you definitely need to read this. The vibes were amazing. Even though I was a little bit confused and the beginning was a little bit hard to get through, I think it was definitely still worth it. After that, I picked up Uzumaki by Junji Ito. This is a horror manga with some of the creepiest imagery ever. For this one on Goodreads, all I said was, this was one of the most bizarre things I've ever read, and I loved it. I gave it 4 stars. Everything that I've read from Junji Ito so far has been an anthology, so this was my first time reading just like a whole story from him. But I thought it was kind of nice how the chapters broke down. It was almost kind of like an anthology. Each of the chapters connected to each other and like were told in chronological order to like tell the story, but it almost kind of felt like each chapter had its own arc, and you got your own kind of like complete story within that chapter that led to the next story in the next chapter. I just liked the way that it was broken up and told, and how it was kind of like bite-sized pieces. I felt like it helped the pacing. This is about a town who gets overtaken with spirals. Before I read this, I was really wondering like in what capacity the spirals were going to be taking over the town. But honestly, they're kind of like taking it over in any way that you can imagine, and in a bunch of ways that you would never even think. It was so interesting and weird, like so weird. This feels kind of fever dream-y. It was genuinely scary, both in the imagery and also just like how it made me feel. And also like putting myself in those situations would have been horrifying. It's just gross and wacky, and honestly kind of my favorite type of horror. If you're a horror fan, whether you're into manga or not, I think that you should give this one a try, especially during like spooky season. I think it's perfect for that time of year. Okay, and after that, I read my favorite book of the month, and that is The Wishing Game by Meg Schaefer. I don't think I've heard a bad thing about this so far, and for good reason. Like, it's worth the hype. Get the tissues ready though, because this will make you cry. 100%. If you couldn't tell already, I gave this 5 stars. On Goodreads, I said I absolutely loved this book. It's 100% a new all-time fave. Found family, a book about books, whimsical atmosphere, say less. I read this in a day and I was hooked from start to finish. The platonic relationships in this is what really got me. Each character has depth and feels real, and I just wanted to hug all of them. This book made me so happy but also so sad at times. The setting and the vibes are so good, and I just want to live on Clock Island. This was just so heartwarming and whimsical and cozy. I know a lot of people are worried to go into this one because they've heard it's like fantasy, but it's really not, so don't let that stop you from reading it. It definitely does have some like magical realism vibes because of the book within the book that you're reading. Like that book genre is fantasy, but I didn't feel like it was overdone or anything. The blurb inside the desk jacket says, years ago, a reclusive mega best-selling author quit writing under mysterious circumstances. Suddenly he resurfaces with a brand new book and a one-of-a-kind competition, offering a prize that will change the winner's life. Imagine an author on the same level as like J.K. Rowling, with the entire like world and characters and stuff like that. That's kind of who this guy is, the author. His name is Jack Masterson. The main character that we're following is Lucy. She's kind of like a teacher's assistant. The series that Jack wrote is called Clock Island, and she loved those books growing up. There's a little boy in the class that she's teaching that they just have this like really strong connection. She wants to adopt him, but it's looking like it's not really going to be happening for them. But she has been sharing her love of Clock Island with him, and he loves the books as well. And then she gets the opportunity to go to Clock Island and compete in this competition. And depending on if she wins, it could help her be able to adopt this boy. It's just the most wholesome story, and you really get to know each of the characters like really well. And the descriptions of the island and the house and all of that is so cozy and just whimsical, and I just loved reading about it. I really don't have anything bad to say about it. It was a perfect book. I highly recommend it no matter what genres you're into. I also really liked the audiobook for this. All right, and then next up I read The Ferryman by Justin Cronin. This is the US cover, but I'm obsessed with the UK cover, so I'm gonna show the UK cover instead while I'm talking about it. I gave this one a 3.5, and I'm really sad that I didn't like it more so that I could buy the UK cover and have it on my shelves, but it's okay. This one was the summer book club pick for my friend Gwen's Patreon. I'll put all of her links for that in the description so you can go check it out. This one is like a sci-fi dystopian though. It takes place on this island utopia. Everyone that lives there has this like monitor that they like check every day, and it monitors like how happy and healthy you are. If your monitor drops too low, it means that you're kind of like done. You're not really enjoying life anymore, so they go to kind of like reset you. When you get reset, you're kind of like reincarnated as a teenager, or like you come back as a teenager, and a couple will like adopt you as their kid basically. The way that you're brought on and off the island is by the ferry. So you're brought on to the island as a teenager on the ferry, and then you're also taken away to the nursery when you're getting. The main character that we're following is Proctor, and he is the ferryman, or a ferryman, and it means that when it's your time to go, he kind of is the one that like takes you to the dock and to the ferry and make sure that you get there safely. But honestly, that's like only scratching the surface of what this book is. It's a huge book. It has so many characters. There's a lot of things going on. It feels very fever dreamy-ish during a lot of it. And I love fever dream books, but not really in this one or how this one was done. For this one, I said this was such an interesting, thought-provoking read, but it felt like it was just too long and it got really confusing towards the end. It was still entertaining though, and I'm still glad that I read it. It really was just too long, and it was trying to do too much. It definitely made an impact though, because I still think back to the book sometimes. It had a lot of really cool things that were happening in it, but it overall just wasn't a favorite. So yeah, it was interesting, but I don't really know if I would recommend it unless you really love this genre or if you really enjoyed this author in the past. After that, I read a few books that I did for a video where I'm reading like my friend Elizabeth from Ponytails and Paperbacks. I'll put that vlog up here in the cards. But the first book that I read for that was Spells for Forgetting by Adrienne Young. This is kind of like a cozy fantasy thriller. It has like some kind of practical magic vibes, and I loved that about it. This one takes place in a town that's on an island kind of off the coast of Washington, I think, kind of by Seattle. And on this island, there's a lot of like ancestral magic. I think all of the women on this island are born as witches. So there's a little bit of like some magic that's happening. The two main characters that we're following in this one are Emery and August. It says, Emery Blackwood's life changed forever the night her best friend was found dead, and the love of her life, August Salt, was accused of murdering her. August and his mom, after he got accused of that, they were kind of like banished from the island. His mom has recently passed away, and her last dying wish was to be put to rest on the island, so he's coming back and kind of dealing with all of the people in this town kind of still having bad feelings towards him, and they're also kind of trying to get to the bottom of like what really happened that night. So there's a little bit of like a mystery, a little bit of a thriller aspect. I gave this one 3.5 stars. I said I really loved the first half of this one. The Pacific Northwest setting on an island where all of the women have magic, perfection. The second half of the book wasn't my favorite though, and the ending felt anticlimactic. I also felt that all of the twists were really easy to see coming from even just a few chapters in. I think that's my main complaint with this one, is that it was just really predictable. And I don't think that the twists were supposed to be super elaborate, because I don't think this is supposed to be like a full-blown thriller. But as someone who reads a lot of thrillers and stuff, there just wasn't anything surprising in this one. It was still really cozy and atmospheric though. After that, I read A Psalm for the Wild Built by Becky Chambers. This cover is so cute. This one is cozy sci-fi about a monk who runs a tea cart kind of business and a robot. I gave this one 4 stars. It's a shorter book, so it's really easy to get through, super fast. For this one, I said this was so cozy and I loved the setting. I also loved all of the queer rep. I feel like it got a little too philosophical at times, but that's my only complaint. I don't think that I had ever really read cozy sci-fi until this book, and I really want to pick up more in the future because it was just perfection. It was really cool to read about an advanced future society that did have modern and advanced technology, but it was also eco-conscious and good to the planet. It did get a little bit like too heavy-handed, I think, with like the meaning of life and all of that kind of stuff, but it was still just really good and like a very wholesome read, so I definitely recommend this one. Next, I read How to Sell a Haunted House by Grady Hendrix. I gave this one 4 stars. This was such a fun, creepy read. I was so stressed out for most of this. Like I had to keep taking breaks to calm down because my anxiety levels were through the roof, okay? This one follows a brother and a sister. I think they're like in their 30s or 40s or something. And they are returning to their childhood home because their parents passed away unexpectedly. And they're kind of in charge of like getting all of the affairs in order, planning the funeral, getting the house ready to sell, all of that kind of stuff. These siblings are very different from each other and they butt heads a lot. As they're preparing the house to get ready to sell, a lot of really weird things start to happen because their mom was a puppeteer and she would make her own dolls and puppets. And so these two grew up with the puppets and stuff around them, and they have a lot of kind of like feelings about those puppets and like trauma from them growing up. But really weird things start to happen around them involving the puppets, and one in particular. The only other book that I've read by Grady Hendrix was My Best Friend's Exorcism, and I didn't love that book, but there were a lot of things about it that I liked that I was excited to see again in this one, mainly his writing style. I really like how he writes horror and it's kind of silly and campy, but also disgusting and creepy. There were so many scenes that I was like gasping out of shock and like covering my mouth because I was like, what is happening? It was just like unhinged and crazy at times. And like I said, so stressful, but in a good way. I had a really fun time reading this one and I'm excited to read more from him. I can't remember if I said it already, but 4 stars. All right, and then the last book that I read for that video and also for July was The Cheat Sheet by Sarah Adams. So it's kind of funny that my first book of the month and my last book were by the same author. This one isn't part of that first series though. This one is a friends to lovers fake dating romance between a ballerina and a football player. I gave this one 4.5, but I could be tempted to bump it up to a 5. I really loved this one and I was so surprised about that. I kind of figured going into it that it would be like, you know, a 3.5 or a 4, but I really loved this one. I said I loved this, it was so cute, and I loved the friends to lovers and the fake dating tropes. This was a huge surprise for me because I don't usually like sports romances, but it was so good. I also loved Bree and Nathan both on their own as characters and as a couple. The only things I didn't love were how cheesy it was and the pop culture references, but those things were outweighed by all of the things that it did right. I think that you have to be in the mood to read Sarah Adams because it is kind of cheesy and at times kind of cringe writing, but I was here for it. I think if you just go into her books knowing that that's what you're gonna get, it's like perfect, you know? I just felt like you could really feel the depth of their friendship and their relationship. Like you can really tell that they love each other and how close they are. I felt like their relationship was really similar to how I thought of Stella and Luca from Love Light Farms. You can just tell that they've been friends forever. And you weren't just told that they were best friends, they actually showed you the experiences that they've had that have brought them closer throughout the years. And I thought that was really important. I loved Nathan's teammates because they just treat Bree like a younger sister and they love hanging out around her, and I just loved that dynamic. There's also some really great anxiety rep in this one because of Nathan. He has panic attacks and anxiety. So I thought that was really cool, and it wasn't really something that I was planning on being in this book. Also, another thing that I really loved about Bree is that she loves to like buy things for people if something reminds her of them. So her sister and Nathan have this kind of like competition going to see who has the most brinkets. That's what they call them because they're little trinkets that they get from Bree. So brinkets, and they have a competition to see like who has the most at any given time, and I thought that was really cute. I don't think everyone will love this book, but I did. I just had such a fun time reading it. Those were all the books that I read in July. My 2 favorites were definitely The Cheat Sheet and The Wishing Game. I loved them so much. If you made it to the end of the video, leave a clock emoji in the comments since they go to Clock Island in The Wishing Game. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.